This system is the lymphatic system, sometimes called the immune system, and the first module is just going to go over some of the anatomy and the function of the lymph nodes and capillaries themselves. The objectives of this model are to define lymph, the lymph organ, there's only one pretty much, and the functions of the lymph system except the immune function, which is module 2. So this organ system has the fewest anatomical parts of any organ system we're going to go over in A&P2. The spleen is really the only lymph organ, although the thymus is considered one. In adults it has basically receded to just connective tissue, so you can't really find it on an adult. It's more active when you're a kid, and it's where T cells mature. The lymph system is a series of one-way tubes all leading to the subclavian veins, and along the way there's nodes which act like little filters. And so as fluid moves through these lymph capillaries, they go through the nodes, and there's lots of white blood cells there that clean out any infectious particles or broken cells or that type of thing. There are over 700 lymph nodes in the body, and they're usually named for their relative location. And as you can see on this diagram, there's a lot under the arms or in the axillary region and the groin, as well as lots in the intestinal and respiratory system. The lymph vessels all merge to two very large ducts, the right lymphatic duct, which dumps into the right subclavian vein, and the thoracic duct, which dumps into the left subclavian vein. There are three main functions of the lymphatic system. Some of the fluid pushed out of the capillaries is not returned at the venule end of a capillary, and instead goes into the lymph, and therefore gets pushed rather passively into the lymph system, and again it leads to the subclavian veins and eventually dumps back into the blood. So part of the function of the lymph system is to return fluid to the cardiovascular system. Second, it carries fats from the digestive system to the blood, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the digestive system. But what you eat, the fat you eat, actually takes a little longer to get into the blood, as it has to go through the lymph fluid to the thoracic and lymphatic duct to dump into the subclavian veins. And the last and biggest function of the lymphatic system is to help fight infection, which is what we're going to talk about in Module 2. Lymph fluid is kind of a clear yellowish color, like plasma without the blood in it, or the blood cells. It contains similar things as plasma, except it doesn't have blood cells and it doesn't have the large plasma proteins. About 10% of the material pushed into the interstitial space due to blood pressure, diffusion, osmotic pressure, etc., is not returned to the venule end of the capillary. Recall that from just the previous module that we've gone over. And this is what becomes lymph fluid. This material is passively moved by the path of least resistance into the lymph capillaries. And there'll be a little animation on the next slide that kind of shows this. They're dead ends, these capillaries, in these tissues, and so the fluid moves in, and it really can only go one way, towards the larger ducts and eventually the subclavian veins. So here, this little picture, fluid kind of gets pushed into the lymph and it just slowly moves away. Because there's no pump, it's fairly slow. However, there are backflow valves to help prevent the fluid from coming back the other way, and moving around and exercising also helps move our lymph. So moving around actually helps keep you healthier, because as the fluid moves through those nodes, the fluid is clean. Drainage of the lymph fluid is not symmetrical. The upper right side is drained through the right lymphatic duct, but the whole bottom half of the body and the upper left is drained through the thoracic duct, so it's not quite even. There are things called cisterna chyli, which is at the base of the thoracic duct, that holds the fluid from the inferior portion of the body as it's moved up. You can see that in that picture right there. When lymph is not able to move, it collects in the tissues and causes those tissues to swell up. This is referred to as lymphedema, and it most often happens because lymph nodes have been removed. In women, this can happen during a mastectomy. Often the lymph nodes under the arm are removed and one arm doesn't have good lymph fluid return. And you can see in this picture here, the right arm versus the left has lymphedema and becomes kind of puffy. Lymph fluid can become toxic if it doesn't move because it builds up the bad stuff too, and you lose elasticity of the connective tissue and the swelling kind of becomes permanent, or the ability to go back into shape is lost. Another example of this is elephantitis. It's caused by a parasitic worm infection, most common in Africa, and it can cause horrible lymphedema, often starting in the scrotum of males and female breasts, but mainly the legs, like in this picture here. Really not something you want to catch. Again, lymph nodes act like filters. They clean the fluid as it moves through. There's lots of white blood cells there that do phagocytosis. Some examples of some large lymph nodes are the tonsils, also the gut-associated lymph tissue, and the mucus-associated lymph tissue found in the respiratory system. Peyer's patches or GALT, lots of lymph node-like things in your intestines because our food is not sterile, and we need lots of white blood cells to eat all the bad stuff up, all the microbes onto your food. So there's no pump to move fluid around. How does it move? It moves more like a siphon. It's very passive. So as fluid gets dumped in the subclavian vein, it pulls fluid from the tissues through those capillary vessels. But exercise, deep breathing, and backflow valves also help keep fluid moving. If the lymph system doesn't work and fluid's not returned to the blood system or the blood vessels, then eventually you'll lose blood pressure and you'll have lots of swelling and pressure in the tissues rather than in the blood. So you need the lymph system to work. You should now be able to answer these questions. What is lymph fluid? What's the structure of the lymph system? And what do the nodes and the capillaries do? And if you don't, you should go back and listen to this presentation again. It's short and sweet. There's a couple of good websites if you'd like some more information.